The courtroom was packed. The air was thick with tension as the bailiff called the next case. Judge Harold Whitman, a man known for his gruff demeanor and sharp tongue, leaned back in his chair as a young black man in a well-fitted suit stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, representing yourself today?" The judge asked with a smirk, glancing over the rim of his glasses. "That's correct, Your Honor," replied Malcolm Carter, standing tall, his voice steady. The courtroom erupted in muffled chuckles. A man going up against a seasoned prosecutor without a lawyer? It was laughable. Even the judge shook his head, his expression somewhere between amusement and pity. "You do understand the risks, Mr. Carter. You're facing some serious charges here," Whitman said, suppressing another chuckle. Malcolm didn't blink. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor." The judge sighed, flipping through the case files. "All right, let's see what you've got. But I hope you don't waste the court's time." He had no idea what was coming next. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Richard Daniels, rose to his feet with a confident smirk. He had handled hundreds of cases like this before, defendants who thought they were smarter than the system. "Your Honor, the facts here are simple. Mr. Carter was found in possession of stolen property, valued at over $50,000. He was apprehended near the scene of the crime, with no alibi, and, objection, Your Honor," Malcolm interjected, his voice firm but polite. Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "Prosecutorial misrepresentation," Malcolm said. "Mr. Daniels is presenting allegations as if they are indisputable facts. The prosecution must first prove possession was actual and not constructive before making such claims." The judge blinked, clearly surprised. The prosecutor opened his mouth, hesitated, then scowled. "Your Honor, objection sustained," Whitman ruled, glancing at Malcolm with a new level of interest. "Mr. Carter, continue." Malcolm nodded and stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his tone smooth and commanding, "what you are about to hear is not just a legal battle, but a lesson in how assumptions, biases, and rushed conclusions can lead to grave injustice." The room fell silent. The laughter from earlier was gone. Judge Whitman, for the first time, sat up straight. He had expected a train wreck, what he got instead was a man who spoke like a seasoned attorney. And that was just the beginning. Prosecutor Daniels cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. He hadn't expected Malcolm Carter to be this sharp. He glanced at his notes, then at the jury. He needed to regain control. "Mr. Carter," he began, "you were found near the scene of the burglary. Can you explain why?" Malcolm nodded. "Of course. I was walking home from my job at the community legal clinic when I heard sirens. The police stopped me 2 blocks away. They searched me without cause and claimed I matched a description." Daniels smirked. "And yet, the stolen property was found in a dumpster less than 30 feet from where you were detained." Malcolm tilted his head. "Do you have proof that I ever touched the stolen property?" Daniels hesitated. "We have circumstantial evidence." "Objection," Malcolm said smoothly. "Circumstantial evidence is not direct proof. Without forensic confirmation, you're merely suggesting, not proving." Judge Whitman narrowed his eyes. "Sustained. Mr. Daniels, do you have direct evidence that Mr. Carter physically handled the stolen items?" Daniels shuffled his papers. "No fingerprints, but," Malcolm didn't let him finish. "No DNA, no surveillance footage, no eyewitnesses." Daniels clenched his jaw. "Not directly, no." Malcolm turned to the jury, his voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution is asking you to convict me based on assumptions. But in a court of law, assumptions are not facts. If they can't prove I touched that property, they can't prove I committed a crime." A murmur spread through the courtroom. The confidence in Daniels' voice had faded. Judge Whitman exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. He had dismissed Malcolm at first, but now, for the first time, he realized the young man wasn't just defending himself. He was dismantling the entire case. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Prosecutor Daniels glanced at the jury and saw something that made his stomach drop: doubt. Judge Whitman leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "Mr. Daniels, do you have another line of questioning, or are you finished?" Daniels swallowed his frustration and flipped through his notes. "Mr. Carter, if you're so innocent, why did you run when the police approached you?" Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Run? That's an interesting way to describe walking away." Daniels smirked. "So you deny fleeing?" "I deny the characterization. I walked away, as any free citizen has the right to do. But let's talk about why the officers stopped me in the first place." Malcolm turned to the jury. "They never saw me commit a crime. They had no evidence linking me to the burglary. Their reason for detaining me?" He turned back to Daniels. "Would you like to tell the court what the arresting officer said?" Daniels shifted in his seat. "It's in the report." Malcolm held up a copy of the police transcript. "Let me help. The officer said, and I quote, 'He looked like he didn't belong in this neighborhood.'" Gasps rippled through the jury. Malcolm let the words sink in before continuing. "Is that probable cause? Or is that racial profiling?" Judge Whitman's face darkened. He glanced at Daniels. "Counselor, do you have any legitimate reason why this man was stopped in the first place?" Daniels hesitated. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe." "No," Malcolm interrupted. "You have reason to assume." He took a step closer to the jury. "This case isn't about a crime. It's about perception. If I were a white man in a suit, would I have been stopped that night? If I had a high-priced lawyer instead of defending myself, would we even be here?" Silence. Judge Whitman let out a long breath. The laughter he had once stifled was now a distant memory. For the first time in his career, he realized, he had completely underestimated the man before him. The courtroom was dead silent. No more smirks, no more chuckles. Even Judge Whitman, who had been dismissive of Malcolm Carter at the start, now sat in quiet contemplation. Prosecutor Daniels cleared his throat, but it was clear his confidence had crumbled. "Your Honor," he muttered, "I request a brief recess." Malcolm shook his head. "No need, Your Honor. The prosecution has failed to present any concrete evidence tying me to the crime. They have no fingerprints, no DNA, no video footage, just an assumption based on the fact that I looked out of place." He turned to the jury. "And if that's enough to convict a man in America, then none of us are truly free." Judge Whitman took a deep breath and exhaled through his nose. He wasn't just looking at Malcolm now, he was studying him. He had spent decades on the bench, listening to trained attorneys bumble through arguments far weaker than this. But Malcolm Carter wasn't trained. He was self-taught. And he had just outmaneuvered a seasoned prosecutor. Whitman tapped his gavel lightly. "I've heard enough." He turned to Daniels. "Counselor, unless you have something substantial to add, I'm prepared to make a ruling." Daniels hesitated, then lowered his head. "The state has no further evidence, Your Honor." Whitman nodded. Then, with a slow, measured voice, he spoke the words that would change Malcolm's life forever. "Case dismissed." The gavel's echo had barely faded when murmurs spread through the courtroom. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others, particularly the jury members, looked almost relieved. But one thing was clear, Malcolm Carter had won. Malcolm exhaled slowly, absorbing the moment. He wasn't surprised. He had known from the start that the case was built on nothing but prejudice. But proving it? That had been the real battle. Judge Whitman, still seated, watched as Malcolm gathered his papers. There was something in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Respect. "Mr. Carter, Whitman called, his voice softer than before. Malcolm turned, standing tall. Yes, Your Honor. The judge hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. Where did you learn to argue like that? Malcolm smiled. I spent years studying the law on my own. Books, court transcripts, watching trials online. He paused. And I learned something important along the way. Whitman raised an eyebrow. What's that? Malcolm locked eyes with him. The law isn't just about what's written. It's about who's allowed to interpret it. The judge held his gaze for a long moment, then gave the faintest nod. You ever think about taking the bar exam? Malcolm's smile widened. I have. As he turned to leave, a few members of the jury clapped. Then a few more. Soon, even people in the audience were applauding. Judge Whitman watched him go, rubbing his chin. He had misjudged Malcolm Carter from the moment he walked into the courtroom. But something told him this wouldn't be the last time he saw his name in the legal world. Maybe next time, Malcolm wouldn't be standing at the defendant's table. Maybe next time, he'd be sitting in the judge's chair. As Malcolm Carter stepped out of the courthouse, the crisp air hit his face. He took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle in. He had just gone toe-to-toe with the legal system, and won. But this was only the beginning. A local news crew rushed toward him, microphones ready. Mr. Carter. You just dismantled a criminal case against yourself without a lawyer. How does it feel? Malcolm smirked. It feels like justice. But let's be real, this shouldn't have happened in the first place. Another reporter pushed forward. Are you planning to pursue a career in law after this? Malcolm glanced back at the courthouse, then at the people watching him, some still clapping, some shaking their heads. He saw faces of young black men in the crowd, faces that looked just like his. And in that moment, he knew his purpose. I don't plan to just practice law, he said, his voice steady. I plan to change it. From inside the courthouse, Judge Whitman watched through the window, his fingers still steepled. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Let's see how far you go, Mr. Carter, he muttered under his breath. Because something told him, this was only the beginning of Malcolm Carter's story. The courthouse steps became a battlefield for microphones and flashing cameras. Reporters fired off questions, but Malcolm Carter wasn't in the mood for spectacle, his mind was already focused on what came next. A familiar voice cut through the noise. Malcolm. He turned to see his mentor, Mr. Johnson, an elderly man who had run the community legal clinic where Malcolm volunteered. Johnson's eyes gleamed with pride. You did it, son, Johnson said, gripping Malcolm's shoulder. You proved them all wrong. Malcolm nodded, but his expression was serious. I shouldn't have had to. Johnson sighed. No, you shouldn't have. But now you know what you're capable of. Malcolm looked back at the courthouse one last time. The system had tried to break him, but instead, it had revealed his true calling. I'm taking the bar exam, he said. I'm going to be a lawyer. Johnson grinned. Hell, I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Months later. The headline on the legal news site was impossible to miss. Small Blue Diamond Malcolm Carter, the man who defended himself, passes bar exam with top scores. Malcolm sat in his small office, staring at the screen. He had done it. He was no longer just a man fighting for his own freedom. Now, he was a lawyer fighting for others. His phone buzzed. A new client. A young black man wrongfully accused of theft, scared, facing the same injustice Malcolm had once faced. Malcolm picked up the call. Carter Law Firm, he said, his voice calm, confident. How can I help you? Because now, Malcolm Carter wasn't just a legal genius. He was the system's worst nightmare. Malcolm Carter leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled as he listened to his new client. Across the desk sat Jamal Harris, a 19-year-old college student accused of armed robbery. The evidence? A grainy security camera still that showed a black male in a hoodie. Jamal's hands shook as he spoke. "Mr. Carter, I swear, I was at home when it happened. But they don't care. They already decided I'm guilty." Malcolm nodded, his mind racing. It was the same story, repeated over and over. Assumptions. Bias. A system designed to break people like Jamal before they ever had a chance. "Not this time. We're going to fight this," Malcolm said firmly. "And we're going to win." The courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting the case across the country. The prosecutor, a smug man named Jeffrey Collins, stepped forward. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mr. Harris matches the description, and..." "Objection," Malcolm interrupted, standing tall. "The only description provided was a black male in a hoodie. That could apply to thousands of people in this city. That's not probable cause. That's profiling." Judge Ramirez frowned. "Sustained." Collins gritted his teeth but continued. "We have security footage placing the defendant at the scene." Malcolm smirked. "Let's talk about that footage." He turned to the screen as the grainy black and white clip played. A hooded figure ran across the parking lot. "Mr. Collins, can you, with absolute certainty, say that this is my client?" Collins hesitated. "The build is similar, that's not proof," Malcolm shot back. "And if this is your smoking gun, then this entire case is built on sand." The jury murmured. Collins clenched his jaw. He was losing control, just like Daniels had before him. Then Malcolm dropped the bombshell. "I have an alibi for Mr. Harris," he said, turning to the judge. "Video footage from his dorm security system, proving he was nowhere near the crime scene." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor paled. That footage wasn't in the discovery file." Malcolm's gaze hardened. "Because the police never bothered to check. They saw a black kid, assumed he was guilty, and stopped investigating." The judge's face was unreadable. But when she spoke, her voice was firm. "Case dismissed." As the cameras swarmed outside the courthouse, reporters shoved microphones in Malcolm's face. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to take down another wrongful prosecution?" Malcolm adjusted his tie, his expression unwavering. "I'm just getting started." From his office window, Judge Whitman watched the broadcast, shaking his head with a small smile. Malcolm Carter wasn't just fighting cases. He was changing the system. Malcolm Carter had won battles before, but this was a war. His latest case had exploded into a national controversy. The state of Louisiana had convicted a man named Andre Reynolds based on a non-unanimous jury verdict. Andre had spent 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. And now, Malcolm was taking the fight all the way to the Supreme Court. Before the hearing inside his Washington, D.C. hotel room, Malcolm reviewed his notes. He had memorized every precedent, every flaw in the state's argument. His phone buzzed. A message from Judge Whitman. "You were born for this. Make history." Malcolm smirked. The old judge who once doubted him now believed in him. A knock on the door. His assistant, Maya, peeked in. "It's time." Malcolm exhaled, grabbed his briefcase, and stepped into the storm. Inside the Supreme Court, the courtroom was silent as Malcolm stood before 9 of the most powerful judges in the country. Across from him, the state's attorney looked smug, confident that precedent was on their side. Chief Justice Warren cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, you may begin." Malcolm took a step forward, his voice steady. "Your Honors, we are here today because a man lost 10 years of his life due to a flawed, outdated system. The question before us is simple: does justice mean anything if a man can be convicted without a unanimous jury? Justice Hale, a conservative judge, leaned forward. Non-unanimous verdicts have been upheld before. Why should we overturn precedent? Malcolm's eyes sharpened. Because precedent doesn't mean justice. It means habit. And bad habits need to be broken. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Justice Delgado, known for her sharp questions, tapped her pen. The state argues that a conviction by a majority is still fair. How do you respond? Malcolm didn't miss a beat. If the standard of guilt is beyond a reasonable doubt, then how can doubt exist within the jury itself? A single dissenting vote means doubt exists. And doubt means we cannot take a man's freedom. The room was still. The Chief Justice nodded. You make a compelling argument, Mr. Carter. Malcolm's heart pounded, but he kept his composure. Because he knew, he had just made history. The verdict weeks later, the Supreme Court issued its ruling, Small Blue Diamond Carter v. Louisiana, 6-3 decision. Small Blue Diamond non-unanimous jury convictions are unconstitutional. Small Blue Diamond Andre Reynolds is freed. The news went viral. Malcolm Carter's name was on every headline. Loudspeaker: the man who changed the justice system. Loudspeaker: Malcolm Carter, from defendant to Supreme Court champion. At his press conference, a reporter asked, Mr. Carter, what's next for you? Malcolm smiled. The fight isn't over. One victory doesn't mean justice is automatic. It means we have to keep pushing. And as he walked off stage, his phone buzzed again. A message from Judge Whitman. I think you should consider becoming a judge yourself. Malcolm chuckled, tucking the phone away. Maybe someday. But for now, he had more fights to win. Years had passed since Malcolm Carter first stood in that courtroom, laughed at and underestimated. Now, he was a legend. His Supreme Court victory had reshaped the justice system. His law firm had become one of the most respected in the country, taking on wrongful convictions and fighting systemic bias. But there was one battle left to fight. He was running for Attorney General of the United States. The campaign of a lifetime. Malcolm stood before a crowd of thousands in his hometown, the same streets where he had once been profiled, stopped, and almost lost his freedom. I was never supposed to be here, he said, gripping the podium. The system wasn't built for people like me to win. But we're here anyway. For too long, justice has belonged to the privileged. That ends today. If I am elected Attorney General, I will fight to make the law work for all of us, not just the few. His words spread like wildfire. News stations broadcasted his speeches nationwide. His opponent? A career politician backed by corporate donors and the old guard. They called Malcolm radical. They said he was too young. But the people knew the truth. He wasn't radical. He was right. And on election night, the country spoke. The results came in: Small Blue Diamond Malcolm Carter, 53%; Small Blue Diamond opponent, 46%. Malcolm had won. He was now the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the United States. As he stood at the podium, preparing for his first speech as Attorney General, he thought back to that courtroom years ago, to the judge who had laughed at him, to the prosecutor who had doubted him. And now, he was the one in power. But he didn't smile out of revenge. He smiled because he knew this victory wasn't his alone. It belonged to every person who had been silenced, to every innocent man behind bars, to every young kid told they'd never make it. As the cameras rolled, Malcolm Carter spoke the words that would define his legacy: justice isn't a privilege. It's a right. And as long as I stand, I will fight for it. The world was watching. And Malcolm Carter was just getting started.